I guess we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Alpheus Madsen, and I'm presenting parentheses on the web, which is about using Common Lisp for web programming. And so the first thing I'm going to touch on is why Common Lisp. And basically, the question to ask is, why are we even thinking about using Common Lisp on the web? Lisp is kind of a weird and crufty language, and it's with a lot of weird parentheses and odd syntax. And the answer is that while it is weird and quirky and crufty, Lisp comes with a certain amount of power, and it has a certain simplicity to it that allows us to do interesting and complicated things that would be difficult to do in other languages. And it's this aspect that makes Common Lisp a really cutting edge language, despite the fact that it's the language itself is 80 years, dates back from 1980, and before that it is based on dialects that go all the way back to 1958. And so there's a quote that struck out to me that describes describes this. As for how practical this language is for web development, it's as practical as you make it. Lisp is the perfect language for gray areas where we still haven't quite figured out how to do things. I believe the web is one such area, and experimentation and playful exploration of ideas is vital. This is what Lisp was designed for, not for the web specifically, but for what it is. A new playground where flexibility and creativity have room to grow. And as a mathematician myself, beyond the fact that I'm a mathematician and a computer programmer, I really like to tinker with things and experiment with things. And so one of the things that has always attracted me to Common Lisp is the fact that you could that it's basically optimized for tinkering with things and for experimentation and for discovering new things. And so when I first volunteered for this talk, I had certain goals in mind, and it was actually somewhat nebulous as to what I specifically wanted to talk about. But basically, my primary goals was to become more familiar with libraries that are available for Common Lisp, and also to develop a basic login for a website and to extend that website in some sort of interesting way, and then to see if I could use parent script and webblocks or whatever other direction I decided to go to play with nicely with AngularJS, CSS3, and HTML5. Now, of these goals, because of the various things that had happened since I originally offered to make this talk, the only one I was able to accomplish was the first one. But I still have an interest in being able to do these other things. But basically, I haven't had the time to really pursue them at the moment. And actually, some of it, as I've learned more about some of these things, I've also discovered that some of it might not be as applicable as I originally thought. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is parent script. And parent script is really a basic language to JavaScript compiler. Only it compiles to native JavaScript without needing any external JavaScript libraries. And as a Common Lisp library, you have access to native macros and other Common Lisp features. But it's although the goal of parent script is to be, or one of the goals of parent script is to be as compatible to Common Lisp as possible. Another goal is also to be able to install it without any external libraries. And so one of the results of that is that the Common Lisp object system is available to ParentScript, but it's only available as a separate JavaScript library because of various conflicts and impedance between JavaScript and Common Lisp. So here's a sample of using ParentScript, and basically it's actually the portion that actually compiles to JavaScript is right here, the PS macro, and there are certain. This is actually a fairly simple example that I'll just give allow you to give you an alert when you click on this or when you call this this handler for the example. And I haven't really gotten too much into JavaScript beyond the basic tutorial, but it has certain techniques for compiling JavaScript compiling Common Lisp into JavaScript that actually helps it to be to maintain both the spirit of Common Lisp and the spirit of JavaScript. One example is if you were to create a function called define easy handler, or something akin to the Common Lisp function here, define easy handler, using the dashes. When it's translated into JavaScript, it will actually, instead of using dashes or underscores, it will do camel case, define it as a camel case function or variable. So there are a couple of caveats with trying to use JavaScript, though. The first one is there's a certain impedance mismatch between ParentScript and Common Lisp. So the example I mentioned here is the plus function. In Common Lisp, the plus is a function rather than a symbol, and so you could actually use actually treat it as any other function in Common Lisp, which includes something called mapcar, which basically takes a function and applies it to every single thing in a list that's passed to it. But you can't really do that in a ParentScript macro because the plus function in Common, or the plus symbol maps to this plus symbol in JavaScript, and in JavaScript plus isn't a function but an operator. And another disadvantage is that when you compile from ParentScript to JavaScript, and you need to debug JavaScript in the browser, you're looking at the compiled JavaScript rather than the original source code. And it's my understanding that this is actually a common problem with languages that compile to JavaScript. And so you also lose you lose a little bit of debugging information when you use ParentScript rather than straight JavaScript. So the other thing I was going to talk about is webblocks, and webblocks is a library for, well, not just a library but a framework for developing web applications, and it's actually and here's a statement given by the creator of webblocks. One of his primary goal for developing it. He said, "I like HTML in the same way I like PDF, as a document serialization format that does a reasonable job and that I never want to modify by hand. This is one of the main reasons why I started Webblocks framework. I never wanted to write a line of HTML again. Ironically, I ended up writing a lot of HTML and learning more about its quirks, accessibility issues, and CSS hooks than I ever wanted to. But I finally ended up with a high-level user interface definition language embedded into Common Lisp. Finally, HTML is out of my life for good. Being lazy does pay off." And widgets is based on, or webblocks is based on widgets and views to display data. And this is kind of, in some ways, a departure from the model view controller framework that most other frameworks use. And one of the reasons for the departure is because the author wanted to have a certain flexibility that and be able to work with more complicated models than an MVC framework typically provides you. So a widget can be a function or a string or an object, as I understand it. Webblocks is something that I haven't really had a chance to experiment with code with, or experiment with in the command line, or in trying to write code for. But it's but I think I've been able to read enough to understand it, have a general idea of how it works. So basically, a widget is able to keep track of its own state, and it can update itself. And composite widgets can be can contain other widgets, which in turn can contain other widgets. And when you render a composite a widget, it's able to it renders each subwidget in the order that it is in the widget. So basically, the advantage of this model is once you create a widget, you don't really have to worry about how it's manipulated or how it's or where you can put it. Basically, you could put it anywhere, and you could generally expect it to work where you put it. And so here's an example of a class definition, and in Common Lisp. And basically, it's a simple class that defines an employee with a first name and a last name and a contract type and age. And basically one of the original ideas that was attempted to be used in webblocks was to use this as the sole definition of a widget. And basically, the Common Lisp class already gives us a lot of information about how the data we can expect the data to behave. For example, the first name in this case only has a reader, which tells us that we're expecting to be able to only read the first name and not be able to write to it. And contract has 4 different types. And an age in this case can only be type null or integer, and so that gives us that potentially gives us everything we need to write out of a widget. But the problem is that this is a little too rigid. It's basically the data, and that's it. And sometimes you want to be able to add to it, and sometimes you want to be able to take away from it. And so then the other aspect of webblocks, in order to take care of that, is to create views, which allows for inheritance and composition in order to render widgets. So you basically create a new view. When you want to display a widget in a certain way, you create a view for it, and that view and in that view you could determine whether or not slots can be added or hidden, and how the CSS and IDs are generated. And in fact, it typically automatically generates the CSS classes based on the names of the classes that are involved in the creation of the widget. And although there's a goal to avoid HTML as much as possible, it's still available for needs of creating a new view. But once you have once you created a new view, you're free to use it without having to worry about HTML again. And so here's an example of a view, and basically it gives us it tells us that it has a form of default method, and it's for posting. And so this is and so if I recall correctly, this tells us that this is. I can't remember if this is strictly just for entering data through the web, or if this view allows you to swap between viewing and displaying. But certain widgets have the ability to be able to keep track of that and what state you're in, and make sure that you and allow you to be able to have different states of the element as you need them. But in this case, this particular view takes the original object, and it also adds more information to it, such as in this case we're also required to add a last name, and we give the view the last name the view a label of a family name. And it tells us that we could present the contract as with radio buttons, and for the age, it allows us to input to specify the maximum input, and it describes how it's supposed to be parsed. And this is one of the things that actually kind of required me to rethink my goals. One of my goals was to figure out how I would be able to use Angular with weblocks. And one of my understandings of Angular is that it allows you to create to add this kind of information in, like for example, to designate that the age would have a maximum length of 3 and that it's an integer, and Angular allows you to specify that within the HTML itself, allowing you to write JavaScript that would check that for you. And as I understand weblocks views, that actually the views will actually take care of that. Will actually take care of that for you as well. And so, in that sense, I have the impression that weblocks would cancel out and would basically make AngularJS redundant. But it's something that when I get a chance to experiment more with, I'd like to keep that in mind to see if I'd be able to see whether or not AngularJS could still play a role. So weblocks uses something called a continuation to keep track of a user state, and continuations are actually something that I'm still trying to wrap my head around.
Is that like continuations as in scheme?
Yeah, it's like scheme continuations. And actually, Common Lisp doesn't come with continuations built in, and so there's actually a library called CLCont that was written for weblocks so that he'd be able to use continuations in his framework. And basically from what I understand of continuations, continuation allows the function to include information of usually a function that you could call when you're done with when you're done with the function, and that function that function you pass in would be able to go back to where you were originally. But basically, because the continuations are able to are used to keep track of where you are, it makes it possible to handle to automatically handle browser navigation. So currently at the place where I'm working, the platform we have is when I was originally trained in how to use the sales platform. One of the pieces of advice was we're told that we shouldn't use the back button, and half the time I'd ignore the advice and use it anyway. Particularly if I knew, particularly when I thought I knew what I was doing. But basically because it's written in PHP, there isn't really a graceful way of handling of keeping track of where you are at a given point in time. But Weblox uses continuations to keep track of where you are, so that you could go back and forth and if you change data, it'll keep track of what data you changed and so forth. And it also uses Ajax to update each widget automatically. And if JavaScript isn't available, it degrades naturally. And because Weblox uses continuations in this way, it gracefully handles sequential control flow. And an example of that this is right here, where basically in this we have a composite widgets using a root and 3 different agreements, and basically in order to display the protected content, we need to accept all 3 agreements. Otherwise, it's going to show us an error. And basically, as we the continuations are used to keep track of where we are within this entire process. So if I decide to click or to say yes to the first and second, and I'm looking at a third, and I decide to go back and look at the second agreement again, the continuations would allow me to do that, and then it would allow me to go back forward again, and then once I make the agreements, it'll then be able to determine whether which page they should be shown. And one thing, one of the things that I should point out is that even though Weblox uses continuations to keep track of this state and navigation state, it's something that you don't really need to understand in order to use it properly. It's basically built into the framework, and because abstract is or abstraction has already been built in, it's something that it's something that makes things simpler without having to worry about the details. Basically, one of the dangers of that, though, is that continuations have a certain amount of overhead that's usually found on the server. That if you're not aware of that overhead, then it might create problems, particularly if you have a lot of users. And so after I've been able to go over these things, I've had to revise my goals. And the first one is I still have a desire to develop a website using login using Weblox. And then once I've accomplished that, I'd hope to be able to see what I could do with CSS3 and HTML5, and see what role JavaScript might be able to play. Well, I said JavaScript, but I meant parent script. See what role that would play in the development of that. And at this point, Angular JS seems a little redundant to me, but I'm still curious as to what role that might play, as well as other potential JavaScript frameworks. And then last night I actually had a random idea, and that it might be interesting to see if it's possible to use a Common Lisp GUI toolkit, or even something as off the wall as an ncurses toolkit, to create non-HTML views. And it occurred to me that if a view is something that's independent of a widget, that it may be possible to create to create other views that don't even use HTML at all, but use they use a native operating system's widgets to display data. And actually, if this is possible, it'd be possible to write an application that would be able to render itself as a web page or as a desktop application, depending on what platform you're on, and be able to swap between the two relatively easy. And I'm not entirely sure how useful that would be at this point of time, but it seems like an interesting thing to experiment with. So that's pretty much what I've actually, before I go to questions, but that's pretty much all I've had to prepare today. But except to I should mention that Common Lisp has other libraries that I didn't really look into as much detail as I'd have liked, because I ran out of time and being able to explore these things. But in addition to webblocks, there are other libraries that allow you to that have a more traditional approach to creating web applications, such as there's a library called RESTOS for web for doing REST framework stuff, and other libraries that allow you to do model view controller work as well. So are there any questions?
Which implementation of Lisp did you use to achieve this?
Well, that's I haven't really been able to experiment with it, but SBCL, which stands for Steel Bank Common Lisp, I think is the preferred platform for webblocks, if I recall correctly. But I think it's been there have been other Common Lisp implementations it's been used on as well, if I remember right.
Is SBCL the one that you like to use personally? Or?
Well, personally, I've liked C-Lisp because C-Lisp comes with tab completion and being able to use the arrow keys to navigate previous entries. But recently I discovered that there's a library you could install in SBCL that gives you some of that same functionality. Okay. Are there any other questions?
So were you able to actually generate a web page from Common Lisp?
Well, I've been able to generate a web page using parent script, but it's only been very basic examples, and basically the only page I was able to implement at the time, it showed a link that would show an alert that would give that would say "Hello World," and actually one of the things I should point out is that in the process of going through the particular JavaScript tutorial, and actually here are some of the references I was looking at, and the parent script tutorial I was looking at actually has turns out to have a bug because the web server that's underlying it had changed this API since the tutorial had originally been written. It's called Henchitude, and I had to. It took me a little while to figure out what was going on and why it wasn't rendering the page correctly. And actually, of these sources, I mostly focused on the first four, but I was able to read some of Lisp webtails, but Lisp webtails actually focuses more on using REST as for web development rather than weblogs. So, are there any other questions?
Does Hacker News use Lisp? I
I'm-
don't expect you to know, but
I'm not sure.
in case.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't know that.
I think I saw something that said they do it.
As I recall, Hacker News, the website is written in Arc, which is I think it's a Lisp dialect written in scheme.
So, does anyone else have any questions?